It's Sunday morning with Mark Sainsbury.
It's time for Dr. H, as we do every week. Harold Hillman, our leadership coach, CEO, advisor, leadership, the whole bit. He's the whole packages, Harold. And this week, he's talking about resilience. Now, is this just another buzzword, Harold?
No, Mark, it is for real, this thing called resilience. And given how change is just a real reality now in organizations, it's rapid, it's constant, and it does test people in terms of just a certain degree of fortitude. So there is this thing about resilience. It's the ability, people building the ability to be able to bounce back quickly from, major obstacles that they hit or adversity. And it now applies very directly to leaders and managers.
So in the business, in the management context, is this sort of, you got to bounce back from a bad deal or something going wrong, or just recovering your mojo?
It is, well, there's a little bit of that, because people who are not resilient do suffer from a lack of confidence. And so this is one of the reasons why you want to focus on this now, because there's just a lot of work going on in organizations. And because of those blurred lines between work and home, people are just working all the time now. So you got to really focus on how to keep people strong, how to keep them, this thing around resilience. You can actually build that, and more companies and more organizations now are being proactive about this and building this into their overall wellness programs.
So if I was going for a job, say I go and see a recruiter and I'm applying for something, do they look for resilience? And if they do, how do they actually measure it?
You do look for resilience, and that's something that's beginning to work its way into the recruitment process now. And, you just simply get a sense of how people have led others during change. And, how do they become? How do they pull through real challenges? Is there a sense of being able to inspire other people? Are they energizing, or are they draining? Those types of things. You can get a picture and a profile of a person if you just sort of focus on how it is that they are on the other side of change.
So to measure resilience, it must be largely historical. You'd have to see how someone has actually dealt with it. You can't assess someone's resilience unless it's been put to the test.
Well, that's true. That's true. Even though you can be proactive about it, though. But, if a person, you can certainly pick up a pattern in terms of how people have dealt with adversity. But even for people who haven't, it's just important to be proactive, Mark. And there's some things that correlate with resilience that companies are now beginning to focus on.
What sort of things?
Well, some of them have to do with attitude. So there's this component around optimism. And when you focus on what you can do rather than what you can't do, it translates into a certain energy. There's also, with resilient people, the ability to reframe a problem into manageable chunks rather than something seeming catastrophic. You're able to break it down. And then finally, around attitude, there's this thing called humor. And, humor is important. It's important to keep things in perspective and keep a team energized as well. So attitude is one component, Mark. Then there's physical wellness, and that is people who take care of themselves, they get good exercise, they have appropriate diets, and most importantly, they're getting sufficient rest. If you're making sure that people aren't pushing themselves physically, you're more likely to get resilience. And then that third broad category is this around connections to other people. So there's resilient people are connected into others more, so that they are points of feedback and can help a person calibrate on how they're doing. Those are some of the things, Mark, that correlate these days with more effective leaders.
But if you don't have that, if you suspect you're a bit resilience deficient, how do you increase it?
Well, there is this big component around confidence. So a big part of it has to do with attitude. And if, in fact, you find that each and every time you hit a wall, it really sets you back, you might need to, number one, think about whether or not your perspective is optimistic enough. because mentally you may be holding yourself back. But also, there's just something about being caught in a negative spiral, and sometimes people have to pull themselves out of it. So a big part of it, Mark, is mental, emotional.
But aren't some people just naturally like that?
You mean just sort of frenetic during change?
Well, yeah, I mean, they can't pull themselves out. They don't have that, they don't have that sort of the humour and the optimism and that sort of thing. That's just part of their nature.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah, in terms of attitude, I absolutely agree. It takes some work. If somebody really is trying to lift their game around resilience, it takes work and it requires discipline. But once people get locked into it, it can make a big difference.
Harold, if you've got a leader who's resilient, does it naturally follow that his or her team will be resilient?
It does, Mark. I've experienced that personally. So, I've worked for a few bosses who I thought were very resilient. And that had a lot of impact on me as a team member. My own confidence was directly correlated with theirs. But there is a certain energy associated with resilience as well. And, you just feel that. You transfer that. And that's that component of leadership that we often talk about as inspiration. There's nothing like a team pulling together around a crisis or something that puts them to the test. And it's typically a resilient leader that gets them to the other side.
So the rest of them are looking at the leader for those cues, for the signs that, yes, we can do this.
Absolutely. It makes a lot of, particularly during, periods of change. And, those cycles are increasing frenetically in organizations. And so we pay attention to our leaders. And so perspective and confidence and fortitude and looking after yourself are, those are all symbolic things that your team is paying attention to. And they'll take their lead from the team leader.
Okay, Harold, look, before I talk to you next week, I'm going to give you some homework. I want you to go back. I want you to be more optimistic. You're so down. You need to get healthy. You're letting yourself go.
I am.
And you're going to develop a sense of humour. You're so dry. Harold, hey, look, thanks so much, Harold.
All right,
look,
Mark.
I think you'd be the sort of guy who would be great in that situation for inspiring the others anyway. We'll talk to you next week.
Okay, Mark. Take care.
Cheers, Harold.
Bye.